I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council, and we only thought we were going to have a light agenda tonight. Now, all the action occurred in preliminary open, so I'm going to review the regular session first. Consent agenda, passed 8-0, done. Now, preliminary open started with the normal fare, and it culminated in a vote on an ordinance requiring automatic recusal based on campaign finance. It's the same kind of automatic recusal requirements for council members who receive personal remuneration from businesses or people who have items before council for a vote. So this ordinance extends that to campaign contributions over $1,000. And that's what took up the meat of the discussion tonight, which I'll get to. But first, I'm going to review everything else. That's called a teaser. So first, we reviewed the bond referendum that's coming up next year. We specifically had a review of Parks and Recreation. So I'm going to go down the items that have been proposed and recommended by the Citizens Bond Referendum Review Committee. The first, by the way, in Parks and Rec related bonds, there's a total of $122,781,004 proposed, with an operating cost, O&M cost, of $1 million. The priority number one is renovation of the Tom Muehlenbeck Recreation Center at a price tag of $15.9 million. It's near its 20-year life cycle, and it needs a lot of work. Priority number two is community park renovation. These are the broader community parks like Windhaven Meadows Park. That comes with a price tag of $20.1 million, and this was kind of an eye-opener. We look to replace playgrounds that are older than 20 years. That constitutes roughly a third of our playgrounds in community parks. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Priority number three, neighborhood park renovations. These differ from community parks because they're more centrally located within a neighborhood. They're meant to walk to. They don't have large parking areas like Windhaven Meadows, Oak Point, etc. That comes with a price tag of $9 million. Priority number four, trail replacements. Price tag of $6.5 million. Priority number five, park improvements. These come along in pretty much every bond package. There are just a number of improvements we want to make to the parks. Some renovation of old things, some new things. That's a price tag of $5 million. Those are generally more smaller things, not big ticket items like renovating Tom Muehlenbeck Recreation Center. Priority six, recreation trails. This is creating new trails with a price tag of $5 million. Priority seven, the maintenance facility. To replace the current maintenance facility that is more than 40 years old. That's with a price tag of $13.1 million. And by the way, the maintenance facility was built, I think they said, for 10 people. It currently has, I think 17 was the number. So almost double the intended capacity. Priority eight, park restroom replacement. We've got some very old restrooms, and that comes with a price tag of $4.8 million. Priority 9, irrigation renovation, $7.2 million. Priority 10, Red Tail Pavilion renovation. This is formerly called the Oak Point Amphitheater, $5 million. Priority 11, athletic field improvements, $1.5 million. Priority 12, lighting replacements at Carpenter Park and Enfield Park South for a total of $5.94 million. Priority 13, Jack Carter Park improvements at $7.7 million. Priority 14, Los Rios Park improvements at $6.1 million. Priority 15, development of improvements for Bruce Glasscock Park at $6 million. Priority 16, street enhancements. This is basically landscaping, adding landscaping for streets on medians. So instead of just the basic turf, we'd be planting some trees along the medians and whatever other nifty landscaping ideas they can come up with. Lastly, priority 17, median renovations. This is replacing existing landscaping and updating it. That's $1.1 million. We then had an update from the police department about short-term rentals. The police has been working on devising a system for responding to, tracking, and following up on issues pertaining to short-term rental properties. Now, as was noted in the presentation during preliminary open, there could be plenty of short-term rentals whom nobody ever complains about, and so we don't know about them. And as far as I'm concerned, if nobody's complaining about them, if nobody has any issues with them, then they're not problems. But we do have some that are problems. And we looked at a graph of the increasing number of complaints over the past few years. There are 8 properties in Plano, short-term rental properties, which have more than 4 complaints just this year. There's one that had 9 complaints just in the 3rd quarter of this year. Most of the complaints are related to noise, parties, and drugs. Somebody smells marijuana, for instance. To put that in perspective, there are a total of 866 complaints. I think this was just in Q3, noise-related complaints across the entire city. That's all properties, not particular to short-term rentals. 21 of those were attributable to short-term rentals. Now, we don't necessarily know how many of the properties across Plano are short-term rentals to see if they are contributing a significantly greater quantity of the complaints than anybody else, because we don't have any kind of registration system. But again, that's what the police has been doing. They have been putting together a program so that they can track these and respond to the issues that are raised in an appropriate manner. So there are 4 rental properties that have been identified as focal points for police because of the recurring issues. Interesting note, 3 of those 4 properties belong to the same out-of-state owner. So, coincidence? Not so much. We then moved to a discussion on the rainy day fund. This was an item that I requested a couple meetings back be put on a future agenda. We reviewed the parameters of a potential rainy day fund. This was following a conversation I had with City Manager Israelson, and it was noted in the presentation tonight that this would be a best practice and it would help with our bond rating. So the idea behind a rainy day fund, instead of just the capital reserve fund that we currently have, we like to operate with at least 30 days of funds available to cover 30 days of capital, or our capital reserve to cover 30 days of operations. But we can spend that money on pretty much anything. There are no guardrails. And this was mentioned by Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Recusal during the meeting tonight. When this comes back before us as an ordinance to adopt, we'd want to make sure there are appropriate guardrails. Otherwise, it's just another fund. A rainy day fund in particular should have mechanisms by which money can be put in, but it should be very hard to pull it back out. It should be kind of like the old-fashioned piggy bank that you had to smash to get the money out of. So when this comes back, we need to make sure there are appropriate restrictions on the use of the money that's in there. It's got to be legitimate. It's got to be for years ending in 20, with the sort of circumstances we faced this year. City Manager Israelson did note tonight that were it not for the Colin Cares funding, the portion of the Federal CARES Act money that we received in response to the pandemic, we would have had a $10 million shortfall. So sometimes bad stuff happens and excrement happens, and that's what the rainy day fund is for. So there was support to bring that back at a future time in the form of an ordinance, and then we'll do some horse trading about the restrictions applied. Then we actually broke and went to the regular meeting and unanimously voted in favor of the consent agenda, and then we went back to the preliminary open for the last item, which Councilwoman Lily Bow and Councilmember Rick Smith brought forward to discuss in preliminary open, which is automatic recusals relating to campaign finance contributions. Now, there's some backstory to this. If you'll remember, about almost 2 months ago, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Recusal and I put on the agenda, on the preliminary open agenda, a discussion about campaign finance, for considerations for campaign finance ordinance. There were basically 3 pillars that could have been considered in this. One was a limit on actual dollar contributions, a dollar limit on the contributions that a candidate could receive from any source, any one source. Number 2 was geographically based restrictions on contributions from people outside of Plano. There's already state level restriction on contributions from businesses. So you have to receive your money from a registered PAC or an individual. The third was recusals. This was the hill I always said I would choose to die on. That is, if you receive a certain amount of money from an entity that has a material interest that is not a common interest before the Plano City Council, then the council member or members who have received that limit in campaign contributions must recuse themselves from the vote. So Lily Bow and Rick Smith had worked with city staff to craft an ordinance which was put tonight on the preliminary open meeting. So here's where the difficulty lies. Ordinarily, in preliminary open, we review concepts like the rainy day fund, and council gives direction on whether staff should then craft an ordinance to bring back for a vote at a later time. That's typically what happens in preliminary open. This was different because the agenda item was posted in such a way to allow us to vote on it in preliminary open. And when I read the language of that agenda item, and it's already got a fully baked ordinance in the agenda item itself, linked to it. Ordinarily, we have a presentation or just a general discussion in preliminary open. So we clarified that the vote on the ordinance was able to be legally taken tonight. You'll notice I'm not telling you how the vote went yet. That's another teaser, building suspense. So there was a long discussion about this. There was probably cumulatively an hour on the virtual dais. We had a remote meeting tonight, as you can tell by the bookshelves behind me. I'm not in the council chamber. And then we went into a special executive session to discuss the legal ramifications of this. We were then there for probably 20 minutes, I'm guessing. So it was a lengthy discussion. We were down a council member tonight. Councilmember Rick Grady had to miss the meeting. I'm not exactly sure why, so please pray for him. Please keep him in your prayers. But we had a 7-member council tonight, and there were several arguments brought up for and against the recusal requirement. Now, it's no secret that I already supported it. It was one of the things that I most staunchly advocated when Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Riccardelli and I brought this up to begin with the first time. The crux of it is, if I receive $1,000 from somebody who just has an opinion on every vote we take, there's nothing preventing that. I don't have to recuse myself for that. But if the person who gave me $1,000 has a material interest before the city council that nobody else has an interest in, not like the tax rate in which everybody's interested, if they have a specific interest, maybe they've put in a zoning request, maybe they're applying for an economic incentive, could take a number of forms. If they have a specific interest, a material interest before city council, and I have accepted more than $1,000 from them, then I need to recuse myself. So it already works the exact same way with personal remuneration. Let's say I work for a company that is applying for an economic incentive. That's where I get my paycheck, my personal remuneration. I cannot then vote on whether to grant that economic incentive to that company. So this ordinance, which was proposed by Councilwoman Bow and Councilman Smith, is to extend the existing code of conduct to campaign contributions over $1,000. Exactly the same in every other respect. Some arguments against this were that we're about to come up on a campaign season for next year's municipal elections. Some noted that campaigning has already started, and in the last meeting this was brought up as well, saying there are people on this council who will be impacted by the ordinance in the upcoming election. However, it really doesn't matter whether that election is in 2 years from now. We have an election every 2 years when 4 seats are up, or 2 months from now. There will always, almost always, be a situation in which current council members will be impacted by that ordinance. So postponing it for a day when nobody on council would be impacted by that ordinance would kick the can down the road almost infinitely, unless there happened to be a situation in which fully half the council is not up for re-election, and nobody's running for mayor in the next election. That's highly, highly unlikely. So the urgency behind this was to consider this and take the vote one way or the other before campaign season really starts. And typically it starts in January. Some people are already talking about it. Some people are already making moves. Some people are already accepting contributions. That's pretty typical in a December, especially for incumbents. But the reality is that the recusal requirement is to establish a higher ethical standard than we currently have. And whether anybody would fail to recuse themselves or would recuse themselves for even the appearance of impropriety, which has happened before. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem recused himself from one vote because he was like 3 degrees removed from somebody with an interest in a vote. And he still recused himself. So it doesn't prevent anybody from recusing themselves if they should anyway, but it requires them to recuse themselves if they should, when currently they are not required, even though they may. There's nothing now preventing them from recusing themselves, but this is meant to bring a higher standard of ethical conduct to the Plano City Council, and also to send the message that Plano City Council members are not for sale. And if you want to buy somebody's way into office so that they will grant your votes on a material vote, then it's not worth your time or effort, or money for that matter. And it was noted that our city attorney, Paige Mims, had a hard time finding any other cities that had done anything like this. She found a suburb of Denver, basically, that had a similar ordinance. Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Riccadelli brought up a stellar point, I think, which is that this is an opportunity for Plano to lead. Almost every other level of government has mechanisms to try to ensure the integrity of the elected officials at that level of government. And we don't really have anything in Plano or at the city level that isn't imposed on us by state statute. So I agree, this is an area where Plano can lead. So after a robust conversation, down a council member, we ultimately took the vote. I made a motion originally to adopt the ordinance as written, and with an amendment to classify it as a Class C misdemeanor with a fine of up to $500. Now, here's the big issue. I'm given to understand, this is what we discussed at length. The issue is that we're going to have a second vote on this. And I tried to understand the nature of the difference in the votes, because we don't do do-over votes. So we were legally able to take the vote on the ordinance tonight, which we did. I amended that to just pass the ordinance as written without the penalty clause yet, because apparently we need to bring it back for formal ceremonial adoption, memorialization, whatever term you want to put on it, and there were many used, at next Monday's meeting. So I tried to understand the mechanical and legal differences between these two votes. Ordinarily, we give staff direction, like if there's consensus amongst the council, enough consensus, then staff moves forward to bring back an ordinance which we have the vote on. This was the vote. So next Monday, there will be whatever you want to call that memorialization vote in the consent agenda. Now, I liken this to periodically, every couple of months, every quarter or so, we take a vote in the consent agenda to formally adopt and make part of the Code of Ordinances everything we've passed for the prior quarter. Now, the question is interesting. What happens if that codification vote fails? Like, we've taken these votes for 3 months, the votes on the ordinances have happened. What if a handful of people say, no, we're not voting on the codification of those, and the codification fails? I don't know. City attorney doesn't know either. So we're going to have to figure that out. If Councilmember Grady joins us on Monday and we have a different makeup to the council than we had tonight, and that vote fails, then we've got a legally unclear issue that our city and city legal staff is going to have to work out. But I held to the motion to take the vote tonight because I felt this was a crucial matter. And the vote was taken and it passed 4-3. And so it is now formally adopted, but we'll have to see what happens legally come Monday. And we will have other chances to, I believe the legislature calls it technical cleanup. We can add the amendment at a later point to add the penalty clause. We can clarify a couple of other things. But the significant thing is that tonight, the automatic requirement or automatic recusal requirement related to campaign finance contributions passed. You will be able to see that ordinance for yourself. Actually, you can see it in the agenda, on tonight's agenda. It's posted on the city website. You can see, I always link to it on my blog when I do the council preview. So you can just look under tonight's agenda and link to it and read the ordinance for yourself. That does it for tonight, and we'll be back with you with an interesting meeting next Monday. I'm Shelby Williams for Plano City Council. Good night and God bless.